Before we actually embark on our journey of ParDomination, these are some of the different stations that we are going to stop at on our roadmap. We are going to cover a lot of the common themes that email marketers encounter. And, of course, at the end, we will have some resources that will help guide you and support you on this emotional roller coaster. But before we actually get started and meet some of our friends, no trip can start without mentioning, of course, the Salesforce Safe Harbor statement, in which we do not own any of the gifts that you're about to see.
Safe harbor. All right, so let's meet our team of highly emotional and opinionated team members. We have joy, sadness, anger, disgust, and fear. They're quite a diverse group, and together, their teamwork makes the dream work.
And so in starting on our marketing journey, we of course have process. That's usually where I like to start. And as you're going through and thinking about your campaigns and any marketing goals, you of course go down this inevitable road of just trying to make a lot of decisions. You start out with identifying your audience, and then what messaging should the audience receive, and then what's the call to action. But is it the right call to action? Are we actually getting to the 80% of our majority market, or are we too focused on the 20% of the fringe cases? And do we need to automate, and how we automate it, and why is it being automated? And then you just get to this point where you're like lying on the floor, just feeling so crushed by the decision paralysis that you have. And of course, that can just feel like overwhelming sadness, right? Of I've got all these decisions to make. But to kind of put in perspective when you are starting out on your journey, you can, one, take a deep breath, and then pick what your timeline is going to be. So, pick that end date of when this journey is going to end, and then start to work backwards, which can help streamline the decisions that you have to make, provide clarity, and then ultimately get you to answer to automate or not to automate, which will be your ultimate question.
Which is a joyful question. And I would stress that it's not a set and forget situation. There's a lot of things that we can do with automation. But just because you can doesn't mean you should automate everything. Start simple. Quick and simple automations can add up to a lot of time saved, and you'll be able to ship sooner. Larger, more complex automations deserve a bit more thought process, and regardless of the scope of any automation, it's a good idea to map that desired process into a design document of some form. It doesn't even matter if you're starting with a napkin or doing something, with the design tool online. We can always revise if it needs to be changed down the road, and there's more on this later. But make sure that you collaborate with the appropriate people, resources, teams, the other emotions that are in the room, because as we saw, making decisions can be overwhelming. We don't want to get sad, nor do we want to get a little too trigger happy and automate everything, because that can also create issues for our operations. So once that automation is live, schedule a review down the road on an ongoing basis to assess its efficiency, tune it up as needed. Anyone who drives a vehicle or has flown on an aircraft at any point in their lifetime should appreciate the need to keep those machines in top working order. I love to travel, but I'm not getting on a plane that hasn't been properly maintained, and which requires a very important next step, which is
testing. Ugh. The dreaded, time-consuming, excruciating, iterative process. I mean, how dare you ask me to do the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again? I mean, isn't that just the definition of insanity? Well, yes, it is. While it could be painfully, disgustingly painful, it is super important to go through and test everything so that you understand whether or not the automations that you've put in place, the process map that you've outlined, that your audience is actually going to reach the journey that you've outlined for them. And so, at least when I was starting out, I know I always focused on that happy path test, taking the steps that I knew were going to cause the automations that I've set up, and give me that, like, yes, it did what it like I set it up to do. It did the automation. But also taking some time to focus on what are those edge cases, really putting yourself in your audience's shoes, and then clicking on the buttons that, are, I'll click this 3 days late, or I'll forward this to a friend, and, maybe they click on this, going through whatever you think that your audience is going to do with your marketing materials, so that you can understand where are those gaps in your automation, where are those pitfalls, and how do you figure them out? Which of course leads us to A/B testing, which is amazing. You really want to make sure that your messaging is getting across and which call to action is stronger, but you can go wrong with A/B testing. It can become painfully long and extreme, but the best advice that we can offer is, with testing, take one variable at a time. Go through a set of testing steps where maybe you have 5 variables that you want to test, but you choose one, and then you iterate that 5 times while everything else is constant. So that way you can really make sure that the results that you want are coming through.
Which is a very important conversation around analytics, which can cover a lot of things. It can mean a lot of things. But the important thing to remember is we have to start somewhere. Again, it is a process to get to meaningful and reliable outputs, so that we can ensure we are on track. Or if we're off track, how do we get back on track? So really it's important to start by setting a target or a set of targets, especially if you're starting from scratch. Like benchmarks, KPIs, those are all really at the beginning, they're sort of guesses, right? So let's start with what we think is important to us as well as our audience, because it's not just about us. We need to deliver value. And so the reporting and analytics that we can gather from the data can give us some insight into that. So once we've set that, we then need to measure, check our results to see what they're telling us. So in the case of A/B testing, a lot of times that is, dare I say, automated, and it gives us the results of the winner. But again, it's important to look at it through sort of with a grain of salt, if you will, because just because something looks good doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate. Sometimes some people get a little overexcited about a high open rate, which is in general a good indicator, but I'm much more interested in like click-through rate. What was the call to action? Did they complete the process? And how did they get there? And so looking at all of these things, it's important to look at where are our gaps? Where are we doing well? What can we and should we lean into? And what are things that maybe we pull back, scale back? And again, over time and through iteration, we'll get better. We'll fine tune these reports so that those benchmarks and those KPIs that we set out, those are going to evolve over time. Again, just like in the automation, setting and forgetting is a recipe for disaster, and we don't want to go down that path. And in the case of our CFO, Anger here, he's going to be, what is on screen? Like, I see all these pictures, I see all these graphs. Like, I don't care about that. What is it actually telling me? Like, bottom line, what's going on? What do I need to know, and what do we need to do to make this better, or how do we reinforce what's going on? And so those reports, we need to understand what they are and document those so that we understand where we came from.
Yes, because I can attest, your future self will thank you. Future Carmel always thanks past Carmel for what she's written up. And so taking that time to really just write out every decision that you made, why you made that decision, who was involved in making that decision, how did you come to that, and then what were you hoping to achieve, is going to give you better context into the analytics that you're looking at. It can be really fearful to write documentation. I know when I was starting out, I had many moments where I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to write. I don't know what this is supposed to look like. Is this right? Is this wrong? Who else is going to read this? They're going to judge it and think, oh my gosh, like what was she thinking, right? But just taking, putting pen to paper, or right now, a lot of us putting our hands on keyboards and just starting to write things out as they come of, we made this decision because of XYZ. We're hoping to see, our ROI increase by 10% because we've noticed these trends. And really, your future self is going to thank you for having those clear requirements written out, for understanding and giving more context into the decision. It's not just, we want to see a 10% increase. That's great. Why do you want to see a 10% increase? How are you going to get that 10% increase? What was that one variable that you were testing for that you think is going to impact what you are seeing in your data? And so just taking that time to really start writing everything out is going to give you a better context in the future. It's going to give you more confidence to be able to say at the end of every month, at the end of every quarter, at the end of every year, this is why our marketing efforts have been fantastic, or this is how we have to pivot. And having that repository of just historical information is really great, because when you're showing off that the marketing team has done wonderful, you get to grow your staff, and to help onboard them. Now here's this whole list of historical documents that they can read over, that they can look at, that they can get more context on how decisions have been made in the past, so that they are informed to help you make better decisions in the future. And if you're thinking, I still don't know where to start with documentation, you just have to take it one step at a time. Really start putting your fingers on the keyboard, start typing it out, and then revisit it in another month or two and see if you still understand everything that you wrote. And if you don't, add more color there. And so every time you revisit that documentation, it'll get better and better and better until soon it's just second nature.
Yeah. And before I lose my train of thought, let's summarize the 5 emotions and how we got to where we are today. And so, there's one very important character I'd like to introduce to you. You might be thinking it's Riley, but it's actually you, because you have all 5 of these emotions inside of you, and at various steps and stages, they all take their turns, if you will, taking a spin behind the wheel. And so, part of a larger team. So, again, coming up with a cohesive process, which can lead to thoughtful automation that enables you to design and implement effective testing, to make testing great again, or make it relevant and impactful to our organization. And from that, we can then analyze how efficient are our operations, our testing, the results, what's actually happening. And we should be documenting this along the way. A part of this is, maybe not obvious, but it's a little bit of change management, and you are the change agent inside your own head. You have these 5 major players on your team that you need to wrangle, if you will, because sometimes you need to listen to one more than the other, but it's ideal that you maintain some level of balance so that one doesn't get too off kilter, because as you saw what happened in the actual movie, it didn't go so well when they all got their turn to shine, if you will. It really was, they worked best as a team. Excuse me. And so, they're all very helpful and useful resources. And so with that, let's talk about resources.
Yes. Of course, no team is complete. We are resources for you, but we wanted to go ahead and provide you every single link to all of the gifts that you've seen here today, because of course, that's why you're here. No, but really, we have curated a set of resources that we commonly reference, that we want to provide to you so that you can go through, you can bookmark them, read them at your leisure. As Chris said, we are all a team. My biggest resource is reaching out to my coworkers when I'm stuck and just having someone to bounce ideas off of. Other times I just like to sit and read documentation all day. So, resources are going to be great to you. Yeah.
And in case there was any question about who we are representing, I am Anger.
And hi, I'm Joy.
I even have my little office mate with me here, so I got my moral support.
Feel free to reach out to us at those links, but we welcome any questions.
I think we have some in the chat.
Taking a look.
All right. So what is the best way to centralize marketing stats, not just Pardot and others, but other social media, other channels as well? I think I'll take first stab at this. For me, it's understanding where does the data live, where does it exist, and how do we get it into one location? Now, there's a lot of different tools you can use to analyze this. My initial preference is, obviously working with Salesforce, is to try and streamline as much as I can through that, so I can see a bigger picture. Because the way I look at it, Pardot or whatever engagement tool you're using, whether it's email or social, mobile, whatever, those are effectively a system of engagement. And the Salesforce CRM is basically, in most cases, your system of record, or at least it's a centralized profile, or should be. And so I like to get all of that together, wrapped under an individual profile, so that I can understand what's happening, when and where, and make sense of that. And so that's what I would recommend, is as much as you can, break down those silos. And it's a lot easier said than done, so I don't want to gloss over that, but it is important to try and figure out where are the pieces and how do we get them together. And that definitely is a larger conversation.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow up there, because it seems to be like a common theme in the chat is also documenting. Documenting how did you break down those silos, documenting how the integration actually takes place. As much as I love my memory, I know after a certain time, things are just going to go into long-term storage and I can never touch them again. So just key things of every time you're doing something, whatever, documentation works for you, whether it's just you create a Google sheet for every project, or a Google document, or you have some type of SharePoint or Google Drive, really anything. Just make sure that you're writing all of that down, because again, your future self will thank you so much for that.
I think this next one, absolutely deserves your input, Joy, regarding testing, and how do you convey that to the sales team?
Yes. All right. So the question, since I realize some people might not be looking at the chat, but I'll say it out loud. How do you explain the time required for testing to the sales team who thinks that you just press a button and send it out the door? And is there a particular ratio or rule of thumb that you can use to explain it? So testing and documentation, really all the things that I talked about were all of my favorite things. So you can really, the way that I like to preface it to other teams of why you should take the time to invest in testing is, do you want it quick and dirty, in which we might not understand really why it's happening? Or do you want to take the time to have impactful data? Do you want to take the time to understand, how are you identifying that something is a cold lead versus a hot lead? And then have some reports ready to show to them. Take the time to kind of draft out the report that you want to give to them and say, hey, if we take the time to test this, and maybe even get them involved in testing and say, hey, we're going to, create some test leads who are going to come through our system, who are going to answer some messages. We want you to see what that looks like on your end, so that you understand what you're going to be getting back, and really make them part of that process, so that they then feel like, oh, I understand why we need to take the time to test. Because if we don't, and something happens in the system, of course, they were going to want to blame marketing. Don't let them do that. But it gets them the opportunity to, see that value and that impact. So I would say get them a part of the testing and have them, create questions of like, well, what happens if this, and what happens if that, so that they really understand the value that's going to be given to them.
Yeah, I'll add on to that. I think it's an important part of the process, and Carmel, touched upon this. Sales, marketing. The stereotype is that they're frenemies, right? It's important to get alignment. At the end of the day, we're all on the same team, just like these emotions. And again, we're all under pressure at times to stick to a deadline, right? But if we all are on the same page in terms of what is our process, how is that documented? Do we have alignment? So that's where documentation can come into play. When we go through the process of mapping out, what are our steps? What is our testing process? What is our general timeline? What's our SLA? Whatever the context is, and it's not just sales marketing. It could be other groups that might be involved in this. It's good to get them in the same room, or in the same web conference, if you will, and work that out. Document the decisions that are made together. Again, that's a whole other ball of wax we can talk about. But it's great if you have an executive sponsor to sort of have the gavel, if you will, to kind of make the final ruling, but then document it. And it doesn't mean that's the way it's always going to be. Again, you want to review things over time and evaluate, is this still effective? Is this still relevant? Is this still giving us what we need, or is it still doing what we think it's supposed to do? And you just make that adjustment. You just update your documentation, you update your process, and everything else should fall into place. But it is a process. It's never ending. You do need to take a breath, realize that there's always going to be something else you're going to have to do, but it's best to work together as a team collectively and collaboratively.
Yeah.
I think we have about a minute or so left. I think we're running on time here.
We are. We have about 2 minutes left. So are there any questions? Anything else that you really are dying to know?
I will quickly. Yeah. Oh, do we have one?
No. I was just going to say, someone says that they love that our shirts match the emotion colors, because yes.
Oh, that is total coincidence. Total coincidence. This was not coordinated whatsoever. I will hop back real quick just to the resources. Again, if you follow this, bit.ly ParDomination, there's a whole slew of resources, additional recap on each of the areas we discussed, as well as more gifts, right? Because who doesn't have enough gifts in their life? So check that out, and if you have any questions, reach out to us directly if you want. Thank you for stopping by. Really appreciate it, and hope you all have a great rest of your day and event.
Yes. Thank you all. We will see you later, or on the interwebs.
Thank you.